What a week to be on the OHL podcast after the weekend that was, Dan Mahar, Hockey Day in the Ontario Hockey League with 3 games culminating in a Windsor London game in the border city at the WFCU Center. And forget the game. How about the social media banter afterwards? Something about being poor losers, and then it's tweeted and deleted or X'd and then X'd out. I don't know what you call it, but you gotta love a little bit of rivalry in the game.
Well, I was a little late to the game, so I saw the replies actually. So there was a reply from the official Windsor count to something from the London count, which had come from the original one from the Windsor count, all of which got deleted in some sort of order. So it was like, when your kids are going at it in the playground and both parents come in, grab them by the scruff of the neck, and go different directions. I think that's kind of what happened. But I love seeing it. It's makes it interesting, doesn't it?
It does. And we've talked about this before when social media was much newer, or at least when teams started adopting a different approach to social media. And we were, as I recall, all in on it. Like, get out there, have some fun with it. It's social media. And at the end of the day, it's just a game. Have some fun.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And it's intense. I mean, these teams are you watch the play on the ice, it's not exactly friendly all the way through, and these are big games and big events. So there's a lot of emotion involved, and sometimes when emotion boils over, yeah, I might regret the odd thing you say or do. And I think you see that from time to time on social media too, but it draws the fans in, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And I think there should be some license for creativity on social media and a little bit of back and forth. You're the social media account managers. You're not out there on the ice. Let the players settle the rivalries on the ice and let the account managers have some fun off the ice and engage the fans, because I think anything that's drawing more attention to the games and the rivalries, the better. So again, I'm here for it. Was happy to see it. And what a great finish to Hockey Day in the Ontario Hockey League with those two juggernauts in the West going at it in a very good hockey game. So we get to look at that and so many other stories this week. And just as we do get into that, Dan, we might have to, like, how do you feel about the state of Michigan as a place to live? Would you consider uprooting yourself from your beautiful estate in Kitchener and moving south of the border to the land of Donald Trump? Could I twist your arm into that? Because let me tell you, this podcast is big in Michigan, I've learned.
Well, you're not asking me to get political here, are you? So,
No, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you.
so I'll keep it benign, and I'll just say that I've always had a really good relationship with Michigan in my life. I have relatives in Michigan. I have played hockey in Michigan. I've billeted in Port Huron. I've done all kinds of things in the state of Michigan. Soft spot for some of their pro teams. I'm a Detroit Lions fan. So to answer your question in general, I'm a big fan of Michigan. Politics aside, how's that?
Well, Michigan is a big fan of you, apparently. So I traveled through Sault Ste. Marie, Flint, and Saginaw last week. And let me just run down quickly. John and Chris in the Sioux, couple of stone cold Sioux beauties. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Thanks for saying hi. John's actually got some street cred in this game, doing some play by play of his own, and it's pretty damn good. But loved meeting him. In Flint, Paul, whose office I just barged into because I was looking to have a door opened. I was there early. I'm like, wonder if there's anybody around that could unlock this door for me. And I walk in, he's like, Farwell, love the podcast. That was great. And then Les before the game in Flint came by to say hi, tell me how much he enjoys the work that we're doing. And then in Saginaw, I like people were shouting names in the concourse, like not foul names or insults. It's like, hey, Farwell, love the podcast. So Rick, Brian, Carter, and Bob in Saginaw, and also the big bearded guy that whose name I didn't ask for as I was on my way to the booth, and he was sitting in the stands and say, "Hey, I heard about shocks and saves on the podcast. I came down from Ann Arbor today, just or
Oh.
Grand Rapids. I think it was Grand Rapids. Anyway, he came in just to see the shocks and saves, and then hung around for the Spirit and Rangers. But really appreciate hearing from you on the
Yeah.
road, and anytime you want to check in the touch points. But I I think, Dan, Saginaw is the home of the OHL podcast, the unofficial home of the OHL podcast.
I'll take it. Michigan's got such a long history with hockey, and there's such hockey fans down there. They really know the game. They really support the game at all levels, which I appreciate. I mean, we don't even do that in Canada in some of our bigger markets. But no, I really appreciate that support, and shout out to all the guys who shouted us out. Thanks for the support.
Absolutely. We love it. And we love to hear from you anytime, either in person, on social media. Dan is at his name, Dan Mahar. I am at Farwell _ OHL on X. You'll find us on Instagram, the OHL podcast, of course, on YouTube. Subscribe, tell a friend, etc., and send an email anytime. ohlpodcast@rogers.com. I think, Dan, the big story of this past week, something we all expected was going to be the outcome after the Erie Otters launched an internal investigation into the behavior of their head coach, Stan Butler. And a little less than 2 weeks after launching said investigation, they announced that Stan Butler had been fired. What say you?
Well, again, I'm not sure we're really that much further forward than we were last time we talked about this, right? Where information is scarce. Yeah, yes, you're left to draw some conclusions, right? So, for a man of his legacy to be out, you have to assume it was relatively significant. What occurred? I would love for it to be cleared up in some fashion, but I guess if I'm looking for the silver lining here, you hate to see a team like Erie that was supposed to challenge this year go through this mid-season, and you don't want it to be a lost season when the most of your roster's on the older side of the ledger. Having said that, if there's a silver lining, it's that people are still held accountable if they're violating codes of conduct and team policies, and that there is someone looking out for this. So I think at the end of the day, there's a bright side here for those that participate in the league, that you play by the rules or we will hold you accountable.
It's a good point on the state of the Erie Otters, considering the expectations coming in, right? So now they lose their owner suddenly with Jim Waters passing in December. They lose their best player, Matthew Schaefer, when he got injured at the World Junior Hockey Championship playing for Team Canada. And now they lose their head coach. What this means for the rest of the season, and if this impacts the Otters' opportunities to go a little bit further than the first round this year, that remains to be seen. But the scarcity of information around this is troubling a little bit for me from where I'm sitting. And I get it. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't, especially in the world where social media and people on the internet exist and can go and say what they want with impunity if they're behind an anonymous account or some anonymous handle, that sort of thing. But what happens is you don't give information, and then people run with something that they think might be the case. For example, there are a couple of black players on the Erie Otters. There's a player of Native American descent on the Erie Otters. You can draw that line pretty easily if you are inclined to do so. And so I think if I'm the Erie Otters, based on what we have heard or not heard in this case, they're basically thinking, well, this is going to sting for a while. We're going to let the internet run with its rumors, and then people are going to forget and move on because that's the way the news cycle works. And they're probably right. And that's why you're damned if you do. If you come out and you say what happened, the internet is still going to have its moment, and you're going to have to absorb that and deal with it, and then wait till the news cycle changes and move on. I would still rather the latter happened here and more information was shared. I've known Stan Butler for a long time in this league. I don't believe personally that any of the rumors online, and I'm sure most of us have seen them by now, I don't believe any of them are true at all. It is my understanding that what happened here is not all that dissimilar from what happened to Greg Walters in Owen Sound. The biggest difference in the two situations is that the league got involved in the incident in Owen Sound when it was basically employee on employee, right? Coach on another employee of the team. There was an altercation. Things were said that ought not be said. The league steps in and suspends Walters for the remainder of that season. And now Greg is back in the league and probably not happy that I'm talking about it because it's basically ancient history now. But I think the same thing could have, and I wish had happened in the Stan Butler case, because again, it's my understanding that it's not all that dissimilar from the Greg Walters situation. This was something kind of internal to the dynamics of the team with Stan Butler as the head coach. And I guess the head of that team then internally, if you will, There'd be a GM and a president and an HR department above Stan. But other than that, Stan's kind of the setting the tone, let's say, and it wasn't a tone that the Otters organization was happy with. And here we are. But the absence of the information, I think, misses an opportunity to let everybody know, recruits, fans, the rest of the league, that this is the standard the Erie Otters hold people to. And by extension, then you might think other teams would say, you know what, we should also strive for that standard. We should also set the bar in the same place. But unfortunately, here we are.
Yeah, very well said, Mike. Not much to add other than, yeah, the rumor mill was churning at full speed on this one. And I'm glad to hear that it may not have been anything related to the ratio. I'd like to think we're better than that at this point. I sure hope we are in terms of who we're bringing into the league. But yeah, there are some old school beliefs in how things should be run and how things are done. And that doesn't always fly these days. And I think the quicker we adapt, the better. And it's not getting soft, it's just getting human. And this is a league full of humans. And I think we have to consider that at all times, especially when they're teenagers, and staff have to have a certain expectation of how to be treated. And I think, yeah, you're right, Mike, to share some of this information, it works on a lot of levels. You have some responsibility to your fans and those who support you to explain what went on, to potential recruits, etc. And even just to send a message to others who may consider operating a certain way that, no, this doesn't fly. So it's not carte blanche behind the closed doors. So I think there's a lot of positive that can come from these stories too, Mike. And I think sharing some of that information goes a long way there. But who am I?
I hope it's not a case of, and that, I think this would have been one of the accusations if more was known. Oh, here we go. It's a woke league. It's a woke organization. We have gone soft. I'm as old school as the next guy. And I do think, and we talked about this last year. I remember doing a Fridays with Farwell video about it. And by the way, shameless plug, if you haven't checked out Fridays with Farwell, it appears on the YouTube channel every Friday with me, because my name's Farwell. But anyway, I talked about this very thing where we just have to, I think, develop or remember that our skin is thick enough, and the whole sticks and stones sort of idea. There is absolutely a limit, and the limit's probably different than it used to be. But I hope that there are still ways that we can hold one another to account, especially in a results-oriented business, because that's what this is all about. And if you're the leader of that organization, you have to set the standard for wins and losses, and people have to be accountable to achieving those goals. And I guess it all comes down to how you motivate people to achieve those goals. But anyway, we'll just leave it there. I'm as old school as the next guy, and maybe I've got some evolution to do, or evolving to do myself. But let's dive into the inbox this week, because I got a couple of interesting questions. This one coming from Zach, who says, love the podcast and the information you guys provide. Keep up the good work. Question about the rosters for the expansion teams. If Muskegon and Youngstown were to join the league next year or the year after or whenever, how would their rosters be constructed? Would there be some sort of expansion draft? Would they sign a bunch of unsigned players? How exactly would they construct their teams? Zach, it's a great question, one I've heard a few times along the way. And it is my understanding at this point that the USHL teams, Muskegon, Youngstown, would simply be absorbed by the Ontario Hockey League as is. Would they get maybe some priority in the priority selection, the OHL draft? Probably. Same for the import draft? Probably. But you're basically going to take a USHL roster that exists today and absorb it into the Ontario Hockey League. I don't think there's any appetite, at least none that I've heard yet, for an expansion draft to happen when expansion occurs, which is likely, I think, at this point, going to be the 26-27 season.
Yeah, Mike, that's good information. I think that's exactly how it would have to happen. I think people think of this expansion the same way they would have about a pro league like the NHL or somewhere, where they have some of these guidelines in their CBAs. Very different with junior hockey. You have players that have signed their agreements with a specific franchise. They have trade protection. In most cases, probably about 3/4 of the league have trade protection. So you can't just say, 17-year-old, you're moving to this city. I'm not sure you agreed to that. So there's a lot of different factors at play here. So I think you hit the nail on the head, Mike, when you said the What the league could control is giving them a little bit of favoritism in their own draft, bumping into the headline on the import draft, maybe for the OHL's turn, those types of things. But yeah, you wouldn't see, we're selecting players A, B, and C off this roster.
Jason has a question also sent in to OHL podcast at Rogers.com. Jason from St. Catharines. I love when you identify where you're listening from. Love to get to know where the markets are that you're tuning in. And Jason would love us to rank the OHL arenas and hear some pros and cons of them. Jason, appreciate that email. This is, I mean, I'm still on the clock really for ranking the scout and media rooms in the OHL, which I kind of did last year. I've been getting some heat for it. I want to do better. I want to bring you inside, maybe with some photo and video, but a ranking of all 20 arenas and pros and cons of is a rather, if I'm going to do it right, if we're going to do it right, it would be a bit of an undertaking. So if you'll forgive not all 20 right now, I thought Dan and I could maybe share our favorite from our perspective. And I'm not sure, Dan, you've been to every arena yet, but you take first crack at this.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try and do my condensed version, then maybe do it properly later, like you said, Mike. So I'm just going to name a couple in no particular order that I really enjoy for a lot of reasons. Won't throw any teams under the bus. Obviously, I'm a homer, but I like the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. Doesn't get better than that in terms of fan experience, sight lines, atmosphere, etc. I'll leave it at that. That's pretty self-explanatory. In terms of ones I've traveled to, can I still suck up to Michigan a bit here, Mike?
Of course, it's a good. In fact, you should, because Michigan, the entire state, is listening right now.
I really enjoyed both of Saginaw and Flint in terms of the fan experience, the sight lines, the size of the rink, atmosphere, the intelligence of the fans, all those things. I really enjoyed the perspective there. And then Kingston, I'm a fan of Kingston as well. I wish that building was more full at more times, but again, sight lines, amenities, the concourse, a lot of these rinks have the concourse. You can't go all the way around. There's sort of suite levels that block the tour around. So that impacts a lot of these arenas, including Kingston, but the location within the city, neighboring amenities, restaurants, etc., all those things, I found Kingston right near the top of my list. There's a few others. I mean, I enjoy Sudbury for old school reasons. And there's a lot of rinks I've enjoyed, Mike, but those are the ones that kind of jump to mind as kind of being a cut above. How about you?
Yeah, Sudbury is up there for me too in terms of the old school aspect of it. You love the wooden slats in the ceiling. You love the portrait of the Queen. I feel similarly about Kingston. The big difference, Jason, for me is I come at this from a different perspective, being sort of behind the scenes and in the press areas or the media areas, whereas Dan and most people listening would be experiencing this from a fan's perspective. So if we were to do this, and again, thinking of doing it right, I would want to bring it to you from the fans' perspective, which I don't have. I look for creature comforts. I always hope for, a cup of coffee, relatively warm, and maybe a small bite to eat, a piece of pizza or something, but a place to get that and begin making notes and doing preparation for my broadcast. And then a press box that allows me the space to do the work effectively. It doesn't have to be a palace by any stretch, but it's helpful when there's enough room to get stuff done. Kingston checks all of those boxes, and the sight line too. There are a number actually of arenas where we find ourselves at a blue line or inside a zone, which makes it really tough to see the other end of the ice. And if we're going to do an effective broadcast, the closer we are to center, the better. So again, that's the perspective I see virtually every rink from. I don't get a chance to sit in the seats. I remember, because being a Kitchener boy, I'm a bit biased as well. And let's face it, the Memorial Auditorium is a cathedral when it comes to hockey arenas. Like, it doesn't have modern touches at all, but for a 70-plus-year-old rink, she looks great. And you're in a hockey arena when you're in there. Some of the newer ones feel a little bit more cookie cutter, although they're offering more creature comforts. And I remember going to a concert at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium, and I was sitting down in the stands, and I thought, oh my gosh, how do people do this for hockey games? Because those seats are not exactly spacious and the most comfortable. No offense, Kitchener, my hometown, but it is what it is with an arena of that age. Anyway, I will also add to what Dan said. I'm going to put Kingston down as one of my favorite spots because it offers all of those things. And Jimmy Gilchrist is there, who's called 3,000 games in this league, which is great. But it gives me great sight lines, gives me just the right amount of space to do my work, and they usually make sure there's a pretty good bite to eat before you get on the air. So very helpful all around there, but we will revisit this, Jason. Appreciate the email and come back and do something a little bit more formal. I think it's worthwhile for this league, because as Dan and I will attest, we believe certainly it to be a league very much worth taking in, whether it's in your hometown or going as a visitor somewhere else. It's a terrific brand of hockey, and I think it's really having a moment this year with the way things are going.
Definitely. It's such a different experience in every city, and I think they're all worth visiting. And Mike, when we do this final list, we'll have to actually set out what our criteria are. Like, are we including parking? There's a lot of factors
Sure.
we could put into this list, and that could really skew the results. But yeah, just going from straight fan experience once you're in the building, how much you enjoyed it, those would be my top ones. And I'll admit that one of my biases is I like the rink to feel like a bit of a location, right? You're a location for a better level of hockey. It's not like you're just in some minor hockey rink. No offense, Brampton. You know what I'm saying? It's got to have some feel to the rink, like it's a semi-pro event you're going to here. So that's one of the things that impresses me.
All right. One more thing just to tie off a loose end. We talked a couple of weeks ago about Sean Reid establishing a new record for number of games refereed in the Ontario Hockey League. And we were joking because, Dan, you brought up the crew that he worked with that game and wondered, you said guys usually for a milestone game like that get to choose the crew. And I'm like, yeah, why would he choose Blake Beer? Well, I have since sourced the answer to that very question. Blake Beer on the game, the first ever game that Sean Reid worked on the lines was in the home opener in Ottawa in September of 1999. They were raising the Memorial Cup banner. The Oshawa Generals were taking on the Ottawa 67s, and the referee that night in Sean Reid's first game on the lines was none other than Brad Beer, who is, of course, Blake's father. So it was a full circle moment, and he wanted Blake on his crew as he set a record for the number of games officiated in this league. The crew also provided for him. It was Spencer Knox and Justin Noble, who were also on that crew that night for Sean Reid's record game. They gave him a nice bottle of wine engraved to commemorate the moment. So just to tie a bow on that, because we talked about it a little while ago, didn't know the answers at the time, and going to get Sean on the podcast for a chat. We just have to arrange a time to do that because, 1,100 plus games in this league. I don't care if you're playing them or what, working as an official, it's not an easy thing to do. So it's pretty darn impressive.
It sure is. And I appreciate that answer, Sean. I was just curious. Didn't know if you said, you'd like some beer in the dressing room and they were playing a joke. I don't know, but I'm sure that guy's heard all the jokes about his last name, but that's good. I'm glad they let it be your choice who you worked with that night.
All right. As you know, something that we do regularly on this podcast, in fact, every week, and a couple of the fans that I ran into this past week, Dan, you'll be happy to hear, said, I love the wraparound. You take a look at every team in the league. So we'll do that. And also a surprising team in the East, certainly surprising now based on the way the season started. We'll still talk about them as well as we continue on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. This ain't the little itty bitty teeny tiny bowl. This is Super Bowl LIX. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. Scoring touchdowns is key to hoisting the Vince Lombardi Trophy, and you have a shot to score big by betting on them at DraftKings Sportsbook, the number one place to bet touchdowns. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Each and every week on this podcast, we take a look around the entire Ontario Hockey League, little something we call the wraparound, which, by the way, Dan, occurs to me, we don't see enough of anymore. Is it just me, or do we see more attempts at the Michigan, to
Yeah.
keep the theme running on this episode, than we do at the actual wraparound? I think we see more Michigan attempts, the old lacrosse style goal, than we see actual wraparound attempts.
That's an interesting question now that I think of it, because back in the day, I loved the wraparound. The wraparound was
Same.
money in the bank. Like, yeah, you still see some jam plays, but those aren't like technically wraparounds. You get lots of jam plays. I want the full wraparound. That was a gold mine, because so many goals, so many rebounds. Like, the wraparound's legit. The Michigan's, that's a bit of a hot dog thing. I'm not sure it's that efficient, is it?
Best wraparound in hockey history had to be Doug Gilmour's versus the St. Louis Blues in the 93 Stanley Cup playoffs. Yes. I know you don't love the Leafs, but come on. Do the little 180 behind the net and then come out and wrap it in. A beautiful thing.
I'll give it to you, because A, it was a really good wraparound, and B, ex Montreal Canadian Doug Gilmour.
Oh, come on. That'll ex St. Louis Blue. Let's start there. Okay.
All right, fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
All right. To the wraparound we go. Dansky, you are on Eastern Conference duty this week. Start us off.
Correct. Just want to kick off in Barrie and say acquisitions Anthony Romani and Owen Van Steensel brought in to really light up that offense. So far, combined for just 11 points in their first 21 combined games, which is not bad, but I think they're expecting a lot more offensively out of those two. So how about Barrie still running first place in that conference despite those two not having heated up yet? Look out.
On the western side, I'll start in Erie, where Otters defenseman Quinn McCall scored his first career OHL goal. It came in a 4-2 loss to London. McCall's first goal came in his 15th game in the league. He is committed to Holy Cross in the NCAA next season, had been playing earlier this year in the BCHL with the Brooks Bandits before Erie signed him as a free agent.
That's good for him. Switching to Brampton, I thought we were kind of turning the corner here, right? Getting healthy. Well, they are second in the conference with 197 goals for, but just 3 wins still in their last 10, just not riding the ship quite as much as we expected.
You've got to be scratching your head as much as I'm scratching mine about that, yes?
100%. I had them second in the conference, so yeah.
I might have been scratching my head a little bit, and I'm not sure I was the only one when Sam McHugh was acquired by the Flint Firebirds at the trade deadline. Of course, McHugh went from Peterborough to Owen Sound last year, and now Owen Sound to Flint. But hey, he's been a point per game player with the Firebirds since being acquired from Owen Sound, including his first career hat trick in a Firebirds win over Windsor.
Very good. Forgive him for being a Leaf prospect. Okay, so Brantford, hottest team in the league, and there are some hot teams in this league at 9-1 in their last 10. But I think I have to make the wraparound point this week. Is Mike, we know a natural hat trick is 3 consecutive goals in a game. Well, what's the name for 4?
It's my boy. It's the Lardis. Come
the
on.
Lardis. Okay, we're going with the Lardis. The Lardis this week against Sudbury. 4 consecutive goals in that game for Nick Lardis.
That guy is legit. All right. If you're Guelph, what do you do when you're a last place team and you want to keep fans engaged for a couple of weekend home games? Well, what you do is you reinvent yourself as the Royal City Jockstraps for the weekend to celebrate Guelph's history as the birthplace of the all-important piece of athletic gear. Now, listen, all of you fun police, go take a break. Go on a leave for a bit, okay? Because I know the jockstrap was invented in Boston, Massachusetts in 1877. Stop it. Okay, that was the strap. But without the cup, what the hell is it anyway, right? And that's where Guelph comes in. They put the protective cup onto the strap, arguably perfecting the invention 50 years after the stupid strap was invented in Massachusetts. So come on with your coming on. Sadly, the Royal City Jockstraps retire after going winless in 2 games over the weekend. But hey, come on. Way to go, Guelph. A little bit of hockey heritage in the Royal City.
And the promos for that, Mike, they asked those hockey players to do some acting. And anytime that happens, there's comedy gold. So I'm all for it.
It was well done. Good job
well done
by the Storm. Too bad they couldn't follow it up with results on the ice.
True. Kingston, the mark of a good team is when you see a team that's right at the top of the heap. They're breathing down the neck with games in hand, could be the first team in the East. And you look at all the leader categories in the OHL and you don't see very many Kingston names. That means they're getting it done across the lineup. The only 2 guys they have on those leader pages Jacob Pataglia quietly putting up a 70-point season already. And then Quentin Burns with a league second best plus 37. So two players on Kingston standing out in the leaders board, but that's it. The team is getting it done as a team.
We were kind of crossing paths with the Fronts this weekend. They were in Saginaw before we were. Then they came to Flint after we left, and then they went to Sarnia to close out their trip, and they fell behind 2-0. And the first two games, I think it was 9-7 they scored, 9-6. Anyway, I'm like, they've run out of gas, but nope, they come back and beat Sarnia in that one. They are scoring in bunches in Kingston right now. In Kitchener, defenseman Jakub Kromiak appeared in game number 150 this past week. Now, originally, Kromiak was drafted 8th overall by Sudbury in the 2022 import draft, also skated with the Kingston Frontenacs before coming to Kitchener in a deal earlier this year. The 19-year-old has put up a career-high 22 points in just 36 games with the Rangers this season.
Really stabilized that D, too.
Really has. Getting some power play time, looking good out there.
For sure. Sliding down to Niagara, I know fans there might be a little worried that they were in first place when we last recorded this podcast, now and down to 5th. That's how tight things are in the East. But how about Sean Doherty, Mike? 11 goals, 9 assists on the season, but of those, 5 goals and 3 assists in just the last 3 games. Love seeing when players find their groove. Sean Doherty had a heck of a week.
I went to high school with a guy named Sean Doherty. It's not the same guy, I'm guessing, eh?
Maybe the son.
Yeah, maybe Sean Jr. In London, goaltender Austin Elliott has committed to the University of Massachusetts Lowell for next season. Now, here's the thing, because we're hearing about a lot of movement like this, but Elliott is a native of Alberta, played junior hockey in Saskatchewan, got waived through to the Ontario Hockey League, and is now planning on heading even further east to Massachusetts to pursue his hockey career. That's a lot of ground to cover. And I know the world is smaller than it's ever been, but I think that is admirable to go to those lengths to pursue your hockey career from Alberta, where you were born, to Massachusetts next year.
Wow, quite the sightseeing tour for him.
Absolutely.
All right, up in so moving to North Bay, Mike, and I think if I asked you, who do you think is leading the league in power play goals this year? You might say Colby Barlow, you might say Michael Misa. What if I told you Ethan Porchishin?
I knew that's who you were going to say. Yeah.
You did know. Okay, well, I know you're a big fan of his, rightfully so. 15 power play goals for the Sens, Mike.
It's impressive, and the only reason I knew is because I was looking at the stats last. No, I'm kidding. I'm a big fan of the kid, but yes, I happened to be looking at those stats just the last week, and I saw them tied with 14 at the time, so now Procession gets to take it over. All right, from one player specific to another, as we look at Owen Sound, how about rookie Pierce Bowie? 8 goals in his past 8 games, including his first career hat trick. That's almost half of his season total of 17 goals in just the past 2.5 weeks. And the Attack have also signed defenseman Lenny Greenberg from the BCHL's Alberni Valley Bulldogs. Greenberg was originally drafted by the WHL's Kamloops Blazers and is a native of El Segundo, California. Yeah, California. He's going to love it in Snow and Sound.
He's logging some miles too.
That's for sure.
All right, Oshawa. The bad news is you have the worst record of the top 4 teams in the East in the last 10 games. The good news is you're 6-2-1-1. That is how well all 4 of those teams are playing. So you're not losing a whole lot of ground. And how about Mr. Steady, Mike, Luke Torrance? Just put a point on the board for him at the start of every game, because he's chugging along all season at a point a game.
At the trade deadline this year, everybody wondered, what are the Saginaw Spirit going to do? And they did sell off some assets, got a whole bunch of draft picks back, but kept pieces like Michael Misa and Zane Parekh. And now they can add to the mix Igor Chernyshov, who had quite the OHL debut, 47 seconds into his first game and about 10 seconds into his first OHL shift. Chernyshov scored his first OHL goal. He added another later on for a 2-goal OHL debut. Chernyshov was a second rounder to San Jose last June. And congrats to Calgary Flames prospect Zane Parekh, who joined the 200-point club this weekend with 78 goals and 122 assists. Parekh is the second fastest in Spirit history to sprint to 200 points. Only Michael Misa got there faster for the Spirit.
And Chernyshov and Perek, two guys with NHL caliber releases right now.
I tell you what, I know Zane Perek is not the most popular with opponents because he plays the game with an edge, and sometimes, he's walking that line and might cross over it. But having had the opportunity to watch him firsthand this weekend, holy moly, can the kid play?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Won't see him for long in this league.
No, sir.
So he hit the 200-point barrier. Well, how about someone hitting the 200-game barrier, Mike? And that's up in the nation's capital. Chris Barlas hit that milestone this week against Guelph and decided to celebrate with his 7th goal of the year. Love seeing them come through on the score sheet in those milestone games.
Absolutely. Those milestone games matter and makes them even sweeter when you can add a goal to it as well. In Sarnia, the Sting welcomed 3 new members to their Hall of Fame on the weekend. Jeff Harima played his entire OHL career in Sarnia, sits 7th all-time in team scoring. Patrick DeRoche, former guest on this podcast, still holds the record for most shutouts in a season with 4 and currently works on the Sting's radio broadcasts. Attaboy Patty. And Dr. John Vargo has been providing sports medical care to the Sting since the team relocated from Newmarket. They were the Newmarket Royals back in 1994. So congrats to that trio going into the Sarnia Sting Hall of Fame.
Congrats, everyone. Peterborough, we're going to spend a little more time on them shortly, I think, Mike, but huge shootout win this week against the Oshawa Generals. And remember all that doom and gloom about historically bad team? Well, they are just 1 point behind Guelph for last overall. And my guess is that by the time we record the next podcast, they may no longer be the last place team in the OHL.
What do you mean doom and gloom, Dad? Who was bringing doom and gloom about historically bad? Who was that? Nobody Nobody on this. Damn it, I'm an idiot. Oh, my God. Okay, brace yourself for this one as we look at Sault Ste. Marie. The Hounds played 4 games in 8 days last week, all of them on home ice. Now they've started 4 in a row on the road. And boy, oh boy, do they love their shootouts in the Sioux. The Hounds and Rangers went 15 rounds, 30 skaters in Kitchener's win last week, which tied for the second longest shootout in OHL history. Here's the thing. The game that game tied, the Hounds and 67s, also played in the Sioux back in October of 2022 when the teams went 15 rounds and the Hounds also lost. And I know what you're thinking. If it tied for second, what's the first? I'm glad you asked. The longest shootout in OHL history happened way back in 2012 when London beat Mississauga, before they were Brampton, in a 19-round shootout.
All right. If I may for just pause for 1 second to say, Sue, Kitchener, I love you, but that shootout was one of the worst ones I've ever watched.
It's dreadful.
I'll give Jason Schaubel and Nolan Lalonde a huge amount of credit. You guys were terrific, but not the prettiest shootout you'll see.
There were a few guffaws after the game. Guys were asking, like, what was I thinking? Well, I just wanted the game over. I don't like the shootout. I was ready to go back across the street to my hotel and have a cold beer.
Yes. Thank you, Chris Gazzolia, for ending that for us. All right. Going to Sudbury, ending on the East in Sudbury. I wish it could be more positive, fellas, but post-trade deadline, things have not been rosy for what looked like a really dangerous team heading into the playoffs. Only 3-7 in the last 10 and a few lopsided scores going the other way. So Sudbury's got to figure something out with the new crew they've got there.
Yeah, they do, because there's not a lot of margin for error in the East right now, is there?
No, home ice is becoming a fleeting concept for them at this point, but it looked like they were going to do some damage, but got to straighten it out.
All right, I'll finish off the West in Windsor with a few notes for you, including one about a former Spitfire, Wyatt Johnston, who became the youngest player in Dallas Stars franchise history to score a natural hat trick. First overall pick, Ethan Belchez, teaming up with True Hockey to donate $25,000 in hockey equipment to a program that breaks down financial barriers for kids who want to play the game. And how about, got to give a shout out to goaltender Carter Froggatt, who came into the game early in the second period after Joey Costanzo allowed 3 goals on 12 shots and was down 3-0 to London. Froggatt stopped every shot he faced as the Spits rallied from 3-0 down for a 4-3 win. And that was your Spitfire story last week.
Yeah, there were a few big comebacks. You already referenced the Kingston over Sarnia as well. There were some pretty big turnarounds, and that's what I love about OHL hockey. Teams are rarely out of it.
What were we saying earlier in this podcast, right? The reason we love going to different rinks and encourage other people to do so is because it's such a great brand of hockey. Sometimes the shootouts go 30 rounds. Sometimes you see great comebacks.
Absolutely. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you're always entertained.
So I guess they're not going to be historically bad. And our prospects of the week, something we bring you every week as we continue with the OHL podcast. Dan, you planted this bug as we were making our notes for this week's episode. And you said, how about a little love for the Peterborough Petes? I thought, sure, I can give love to my favorite uniform in the league. But besides that, probably with good reason. What was it about the Peterborough Petes that grabbed your attention?
So I'll start that by saying it was actually quite a while ago, Mike. I want to say late November, early December that started catching my attention, the compete level of this team. And they were in a lot of games. And I thought, another veteran or two added to the lineup, which happened, and a little bit more experience for the young kids. They're going to start being on the right side of some of these scores. And that's what's happened. And I'll start in the nets, Mike, with Zach Bowen and Easton Rye. There's a healthy competition there in net, and neither one of those kids is wanting to cede the crease at all. And not many crooked numbers going up against Peterborough anymore. There's a lot of 3-2s, a lot of 2-1s, 4-3 at the max. And it's a team that struggled to score. And right after I said that, they put up 8. So when a young team like that starts to feel their legs and figure out how to score in this league, when you're only losing every game by 1 or 2 goals, it's only a matter of time until you turn around. So I think the fact that they were in every game and the compete level was there was what caught my eye, Mike. And now we're starting to see some results.
We really are. So brace yourself, and I'll try to keep this as simple as I can. But the numbers really do leap off the page, and you touched on it, Dan. Towards the end of November, if we go to the end of November, like this was a team that only won its first game in regulation on November the 7th.
Yeah.
It got its second win in regulation on November the 23rd. That was the 23rd game of the season. 2 regulation wins in 23 games. At that time, by the end of November, the Peterborough Petes sat with a record of 2-18-1-3 for a grand total of 6 points at the end of November. And by the way, they had allowed 102 goals against, and they had only scored 51. So they were averaging 4.25 goals against per game, and they were only scoring just over 2 at 2.13. That's at the end of November, 2 regulation wins. Fast forward to today, 24 games later, and since then they have been 11, 10, 1, and 2. 24 points in their past 24 games after getting just 6 points in their first 24 games. And the goals against have dropped all the way down by more than a half. They're only allowing 3.67 goals per game, and the goals for have gone up by almost a full goal at 3.08 goals per game. Goals for per game, pardon me. And the wins along the way are not exactly against slouches. A couple over Oshawa. They beat Sudbury. They beat Barrie. They beat Brantford. They beat Saginaw. The Peterborough Petes have figured something out. And as you pointed out a moment ago, they're knocking on Guelph's doorstep there for the last place overall in the league.
Yeah, and who would have thought that, right? Who would have ever thought they'd be in that position at the start of the year, or like you said, mid-November? But I think really, Mike, you look, the stats you quoted are great, and how many goals they were giving up in the first 2 months. I think once young players figure out just how to win some of those battles in their own zone to get the puck back quicker and how to spend more time in the offensive zone attacking, that's when the light bulb goes off. And I think, maybe a little timid early, a young team knew they didn't have a lot of goals in them. So we're really tense on defense. Not when you're trying that hard or you're that scared about getting scored on, often you get scored on. So it comes with some confidence of regaining that puck. And that's what I saw from Peterborough, those battles in the corner. They're spending more time on the right side of center, and the results are there. So I think, yeah, it's nice to see the light bulb go off for a team, and kudos to, the coaching staff and everyone involved, because it starts with no quit, and there was no quit there.
I'm glad you mentioned Rob Wilson and the coaching staff. I was going to bring that up as well. I remember all of the eyebrows raised when he got that 8-year extension after winning the OHL championship. But you got to give them a lot of credit for just kind of staying the course and getting the team to this point. And I apologize when I gave out all those numbers. It's 25 points. I think I said 24 and 24. It's 25 points for the Petes in their last 24 games. Again, 11, 10, 1, and 2 since the beginning of December, after winning just 2 games in regulation by the end of the month of November. So just to put that in perspective, a team we also touched on earlier, but let this sink in. The Peterborough Petes, since the beginning of December, have won 11 games. The Brampton Steelheads, since the beginning of November, have won 7 games. 7. So the Petes have 4 more wins than the fully loaded Eastern Conference favorites, at least at the beginning of the year, Brampton Steelheads. Now, crazily, the Steelheads also have 7 overtime losses in that time, but still 7, 9, and 7 for 23 points are the Brampton Steelheads. 11, 10, 1, and 2 for 25 points since the beginning of December are the Peterborough Petes. Who had that on their bingo card?
Mike, if you had predicted that, I would have asked where you're hiding the flask.
Well, listen, you saw my predictions as they were, and we'll redress this at the end of this. Like, I'm a mess. I might as well just keep a flask constantly to numb the pain of my awful predictions this year. Anyway, kudos to the Petes. They've figured some stuff out, and they're giving fans there in the Lift Lock City a good reason to come to the old PMC to watch the games. All right. We always like to leave you with a prospect that caught our attention this past week. And that, of course, is a prospect for this June's NHL draft. Dan, who caught your attention?
Well, Kingston in general has been catching my eye for a couple weeks. So my prospect might as well come from there as well. And that's the highly touted Tyler Hopkins, really figuring it out as this year goes on, really soft hands. 5 goals and an assist this week, Mike, and he's one of the younger players on that roster. So a lot of firepower. You talked about how dangerous they are. A lot of that's coming from Tyler Hopkins finding his touch.
I think this is the first time all year that we have had the same prospect of the week. It happened to a few times last year, but there's a saying that goes something along the lines of "be so good they have to talk about you." And Tyler Hopkins is that. You mentioned those 5 goals. I believe they came over the span of 5 periods. The kid has been absolutely on fire. I think he's been enjoying life with Joey Willis on his wing, which is where Willis has been playing since being acquired from Saginaw. But whatever the reason is, not only are the Frontenacs as a team scoring in bunches, but Tyler Hopkins has been so good, you just have to talk about him. And I'm sure that you and I are not the only ones who have been doing that. And it makes me think, Dan, again, recognizing the bias because the team I cover is the Kitchener Rangers. But when I get to go to those media rooms where the scouts, and we grab a bite to eat and a cup of coffee and we get our preparations done and we chat, and boy, oh boy, I'll just add as way of an honorable mention here, the number of times I'm being asked lately about Cameron Reid, because the scouts see X number of games, I see all 68, but this kid is on virtually everyone's radar right now. And when I was in Erie a little over a week ago, I should add this little tidbit. I should have mentioned this when we talked about Stan Butler earlier, but I heard some rumblings in Erie that the ownership may stay in the Waters family, which I am really hopeful for. I don't think the apples fell far from the tree with Jim Waters, who I admired greatly. So it sounds like at least that's a good, maybe even strong possibility right now. While there, also ran into a scout, and this hadn't happened before. Came up, said hi, and said he's scouting with a college in New York State. And we don't see that. I haven't seen that before. Or if I had, they were much quieter about it. But I think now with the changing to that NCAA rule, some of these scouts must be loving it. They get to go to places like Erie and Flint and Saginaw instead of some of those other rinks they used to be going to scout players and try to find them. So they're out there scouring for talent in the Ontario Hockey League as well.
Yeah, and it's great for these players, a whole new pool of teams potentially interested, but also a whole new set of distractions, we'll call it, I guess, Mike. You probably see after every game now, a lot more people want to talk to you.
Yeah, and you're at that time of year too where the conversations are getting a little more serious as teams are sort of staking out their ground and trying to figure out what makes these players tick off the ice. Some really interesting questions and some preliminary interviews even starting as well. So interesting times as we head towards the playoffs. And well, did I hear correctly that bold prediction that the next time we record, the Peterborough Petes might be ahead of the Guelph Storm in the overall standings?
I'm going to stand by that, Mike. I believe in them.
I like it, Dansky. I like it. And you know what? In a couple weeks' time, I'll get to be there and watch them myself at the PMC, where they've got the best popcorn in the league, in my humble opinion. Best fries in Owen Sound, best popcorn in Peterborough, and the best fans of the OHL podcast, apparently, in Michigan, as we've learned this past week.
Bless you, Michigan. Yes.
Bless you, Michigan, and everywhere else. Emails from St. Catharines and elsewhere coming in. Love to hear from you anytime. Send an email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Dan's on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm on X at Farwell_OHL. Give us a like, a comment, subscribe, and tell a friend. We'll be back every Tuesday in your ears or eyes if you're on YouTube with the OHL podcast.